Okay, sure. Gregory, will you be able to just give me a bit of background on how you got into anthropology and how you began studying this field?
Yeah, well, got into anthropology back in the 1970s, as a matter of fact. So it's been a long time. I first went to Indonesia 50 years ago. Yeah, 50 years ago this year, as a doctoral student, working on an island called Sumba in eastern Indonesia. 10 years after that, for various reasons, in 1984, I decided to begin a new project in Flores. On Flores Island, and yeah, not long after I began on Flores, among a people called Nage, mostly, who I've written quite a bit about. I started hearing stories about creatures that sounded very much like prehistoric hominins, or hominids. Hominins actually is the more accurate term. In Nage country, that's in the center of Flores, these beings were said to have been exterminated by local humans, hundreds of years previously. Anyway, I found this fascinating, and partly because I'd heard similar, although not quite the same stories on Sumba previously. And the 1980s also was kind of a high point for something called cryptozoology, um, which basically is the study of undiscovered animals, if you will. Anyway, fast forwarding a bit, I later had the opportunity to do research in other parts of Flores, and particularly in the Leo ethno-linguistic region, where I came across reports of a being, a kind of yeah, ape man, if you will, called Laihoa, and I started, recording what local people were saying about Laihoa. The main difference from the Nage hominins or hominoids was that Laihoa were supposed to be still in existence, not wiped out or become extinct. But they were sometimes seen, but rarely. They were considered to be, animals, but rare animals. Anyway, yeah, some of my information on them was recorded before the discovery of Homo floresiensis in what late 2003. The discovery actually wasn't publicized, wasn't announced until 2004. Which was good timing for me. I mean, it meant that local people couldn't, by any means, have read reports of the discovery of the fossil hominin in the far eastern part of Flores Island. So anyway, yeah, I began further research in 2005 into these images, to call them that. And well, I'm fascinated by the agreement between the way local people were discovering that the Laihoa, the ape man of Leo country, and reconstructions of Homo floresiensis. So. Yeah, I was working in Leo country on and off for quite a time, up until 2017, 2018, and recorded a lot of further, I should say, information, including eyewitness reputed to be eyewitness reports of these things, many of which sound quite credible. And the book Between Ape and Human, which came out just a couple of years ago, 2022, is the result of that work. What I did there was to consider a variety of possibilities, a variety of hypotheses that could explain these sightings, and this is quite a straightforward and common scientific procedure called abduction, actually, and it's a bit like the Sherlock Holmes method, of considering all possibilities and checking them off one by one as not being substantial, not working, and then the one that remains, of course, is got to be true, regardless of how improbable it sounds. So anyway, my conclusion was, yeah, the best explanation for these things was that some people were actually seeing something closely corresponding to their descriptions of them.
I'm fascinated with. I don't know how I didn't come across this sooner. Just to give some background myself. Like I'm a zoologist, so I study zoology. I'm also obsessed with cryptozoology. I think that's probably one of my biggest interests as well. And then I'm also a massive Lord of the Rings fan, so I have a Lord of the Rings tattoo. So it seems
Oh,
like
okay.
all the things have combined. I don't know how I didn't. This wasn't something that I picked up on earlier, but the book that you wrote, I find. What I find so incredible about it is that I've studied a lot about like Sasquatch or Bigfoot in the US,
Hmm.
and I've even interviewed people who are Native Americans, and they speak similarly to the way that you describe the people on Flores speaking, as
Right.
they're they are kind of aware of what's mythical and what's not mythical, and they
Hmm.
describe real animals, and they know what animals are like are mythical. So I find it incredible that you have the same ability within the native people,
Yeah.
that they're asserting something so like as if it's just another animal. But yet
Yeah.
it's like Western, and our brain is incapable of just accepting that. Do you have any insight into why we struggle so much with just accepting something like that? Why we always need to have some sort of like a body or empirical data?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a few things to say about that. I mean, first of all, for a long time, in connection with writing about a variety of things, I've been concerned to convey an impression, conclusion I've been reaching over a number of years, working with people in Eastern Indonesia, is that non-Western people like them are indeed able to distinguish what we would call natural creatures, natural species, from supernatural beings. I mean, there is explicitly or implicitly quite a long tradition in anthropology, which claims, incorrectly, I suggest, that non-Westerners, people without, you know, some scientific education, don't recognize those kinds of distinctions. Well, I believe they do. There are qualifications that one could make, insofar as natural species are sometimes credited with mystical powers, but nevertheless that they do distinguish. I'm just speaking of people in Flores. They do distinguish animals, even, yeah, supernaturally powerful sometimes animals, from purely spiritual beings, which are things that, simply said, spirits, which are beyond perception, especially that they're not things that people can ordinarily see, whereas all animals, on the other hand, for them are perceptible to everyone all of the time. So that's one thing to say. Also, and in no particular order here, I would say, not to sound competitive, but the Laihoa of Flores have more going for them as empirical creatures than, for example, Sasquatch. And one point I would make there is the discovery of the fossil hominin, Homo floresiensis. I mean, there is a possible connection there. We don't, of course, know exactly when or indeed if Homo floresiensis died out. Whereas for something like Sasquatch, of course, there is no local fossil evidence which one could connect with the images that are being described. But to get back, I think to the main part of your question, why do we need evidence? Um, I mean, what observer evidence,
Or even just not even just like
empirical
just to
evidence.
get us just to I don't even mean like I understand the need for evidence, right? I
Yeah,
get that. But I actually mean more of a sort of just like willingness to be intrigued in the possibility of something without
yeah,
the
yeah.
necessary body needing to be there.
Well, that's a hard question to answer because I mean there are some people who will accept my arguments, my analysis, but certainly among paleontologists or paleoanthropologists, just to mention them, there is a certain reluctance to quite a considerable reluctance, I guess, to take my sort of argument seriously. And I think
That's ridiculous.
it mainly has to do with kind of boundary maintenance. Um, that is to say, well, I mean, some people have said in print, well, if these things existed, someone would have seen them by now. And my response has been, well, somebody has seen them, they claim to have seen them. They just happen not to be professional scientists or field zoologists. So that's the distinction. That's the boundary there. Yeah, no, if field zoologists can report in peer-reviewed journals that they have found a new species, then it is accepted. Of course, they do have to have to be fair, they have to have what's called a voucher sometimes. I think a specimen, a body or part of a body, or failing that, good photographic evidence. But in the book, I also discuss why evidence of this sort hasn't been forthcoming. And there are lots of good reasons. I think I mean part of it has to do with the fact that no people trained in Western science have set out to locate such evidence, and local people, seeing these things, dead or alive, their attitudes are rather different, and they certainly don't take the trouble to preserve specimens or take body parts or even or even pictures. I will mention, however, just in addition to that, that interestingly enough, just a year or so ago, I heard from two young guys in England, computer scientists, I think they are, who were on Flores on a trip back in 2019. This was some time ago, and who, to make a long story short, saw something that yeah, corresponded to what I've been describing for the Laihoa in a region, not in the Leo region, but in the district next door. And what was fascinating about this account was neither back in 2019 nor more recently did they know anything about my work. In fact, one of them in particular, for some reason or other, about a year ago, was I got to thinking about this experience that the two of them had simultaneously, and started talking to the other one and so on. And they did some Googling, and came up with my name. They wanted to know if there were any apes, fairly large primates on Flores Island, and they learned that the only monkeys or apes were small, long-tailed, well-named small long-tailed macaques, which didn't correspond to what they saw. They thought. And they came up with my name in connection with what I'd written about the Nage figure, the extinct Ubugogo. They weren't aware of my recent 2022 book or anything else I'd written. So well, they were quite fascinated to hear from me, and yeah, I mean there's a report from people who have a very different cultural and linguistic background, of course, computer scientists no less, who, how can one put it, quite innocently had stumbled across something that they couldn't understand, that they tried to explain it, and I was pretty clear that or very unlikely that they saw a long-tailed macaque, because what they saw, yeah, among other things, stood erect. It didn't appear to have a tail, and all the rest. In fact, one of them described the creature as a big monkey, and the other one described it as a small human. So anyway, that's the end of that story, because um, there hasn't been any follow up on that. But I just, it goes to show the sorts of possibilities there are, or the things that remain to be explained. There are other, as you'll read in the book, that there are other accounts of Westerners having, or non-locals, people outside a particular cultural tradition, having seen things that seem to fit to the image of these Flores ape men.
From talking to the locals there, can you gauge any? I know that there's different things you mentioned in the books about behavior that they witness, but could you surmise maybe on what the intelligence level of this species would be, like where it would potentially be in terms of intelligence?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, they can consistently describe these people as apparently not having any culture,
Hmm.
meaning that they appear they don't wear clothes, cover their bodies in any ways. They don't. They're not seen carrying anything that looks like tools. There's no evidence for fire and so on. Nor language. A spoken language. So that's about all I could say on the intelligence front. It's interesting, though, in that respect, that evidence for stone tool technology, for example, and even fire use, is not associated with Homo floresiensis. And Homo floresiensis appears to be a very primitive, to use the term in the paleoanthropological sense, creature indeed. I mean, something like Homo habilis, I think it's 2 million or more years old, or even Australopithecines. So yeah, certainly upright, walking upright, but smaller than modern humans, and really not as, I mean, there's no proof that they're as technologically advanced as later developing species of the genus Homo. Um, in fact, there is, I've argued, doubt about the classification of Homo floresiensis, particularly its inclusion in the genus Homo. That was part of the book I think I most enjoyed writing about, in chapter 9 or 10, one of those.
think it's
Uh,
nine. I think it's
but
nine.
yeah, yeah, no, I mean Homo floresiensis. Okay, the most recent date they got for it, they say, is about 50,000 years ago. That's fine, but this is from a single site.
Hmm.
And there's evidence that the species or predecessors, immediate predecessors, go back much further than that, hundreds of thousands of years. So, by most standards, it was evidently quite a successful species. There's no real reason to believe that it didn't survive after 50,000 50,000 years ago.
Well, why was it originally 11,000? Where did that number come from, and why did that change?
Which one? 50,000?
No, wasn't there at one stage it was 11,000? Wasn't that a number?
Yeah, 11 or 12,000 thereabouts. That's right. That was the original analysis. But well, again, it's interesting in connection with what we were saying about disciplinary boundaries. Quite a few people, I think, weren't satisfied with that date. They thought it was much too recent, in view of the physical form of the type specimen.
Hmm.
And other remains found at the same site. So yeah, years later, after years later, a publication appeared based on a geological analysis of the site, concluding that I won't go into the details. And in fact, this is kind of outside my own field. But concluding that a date of 50,000 would be was more correct, or
Oh,
was correct. Yeah.
that's do you think that there's potentially, because I've come across this in other parts that like the idea of another hominid species surviving is slightly threatening to that kind of idea of our own human history. You know, that I know that we live with Neanderthals, but that's kind
Yeah.
of established, but that it kind of does change our understanding of our own past, and that can be kind of threatening.
I think so. I mean, it's difficult to generalize. Some people like myself, are quite fascinated by the idea, by the possibility. But I think, yeah, it does kind of close a gap which many people would like to maintain between us and animals. Even though the school books tell us that we are animals as well, and at some level, I guess most people will accept that. But yeah, as I pointed out, not so much in the book, but in a previous writing, that coming across something like this, a living species, would present all sorts of moral problems, in terms of the human non-human divide. And how should we treat these how should we treat these things? So yeah, I mean, philosophically, many people would find themselves in an uncomfortable space. Yeah, no, it does. It raised the question of what is human and what's not. This is a philosophical rather than a scientific, or more than a scientific question. I believe the paleos get around it by just using these categories, homo or not homo, kind of thing. But that can be problematic as well, as I've already indicated.
And what I find fascinating is that, um, an idea or a way of thinking would block people from potentially investigating something as fascinating as another
Yeah.
a Homo species living potentially, like, also as well, I have to say that after reading the book, you kind of are left with, you know, I don't get the rebuttal because the rebuttal is basically saying all these people on these islands are all making it up. If that's
Or,
your,
or
you know,
or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
that's not scientific. That's very unscientific.
Well, that's right. I mean, to my knowledge, nobody's actually come out and said that. Um, Although, I mean, there is a kind of a long-standing view, I think, of members of small-scale non-Western societies, sort of people we used to call primitives or savages, um, that they yeah, they are subject to the most fantastic sorts of representations. They have wild imaginations and so on. I mean that can be that can be counted. Certainly, it's not true, but it is a kind of a stereotype, even among anthropologists. I would say implicitly. Um, eh, what's more to say about that? Yeah, nobody. Well, it is a related point. Nobody has come up with a better explanation. I mean, I'd love to see a better explanation of these reports. People are making them up, or maybe that one could argue that. Um, well, I don't know what one could argue really to explain what people say they're seeing. I guess yeah, you would just have to say they're dishonest or given to telling very tall tales or whatever, as indeed some people are. But I think my evidence is sufficient. I talked to enough people and weighed enough counter arguments to suggest that's not very satisfactory.
Well, there isn't also as well, it's quite unique in the fact that, there isn't this massive industry of people going there looking for the Hobbit
Okay,
Batman.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like
no,
there's
yeah.
no money fueling them to make up these stories.
Well, that's right. That was another question of sort of, and if they're deliberately, certainly if they're deliberately making up stories, what would be the motivation? Well, yeah, there's no clear answer to that. But I'll also say, excuse me, that sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought here. I'm struggling with a kind of a fluey cold
No,
at the
same.
moment,
I have the same thing.
as you may have recognized. Sorry, there was something on my
I
mind.
was just talking
Well,
about how what would be the incentive for them to make the story up? Like if
yeah.
like
Yeah.
what is that?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I know what my follow-up was going to be. As I discussed in the book, there are what we can call institutional problems in people, particularly people trained in field zoology or primatology or whatever, going to Flores to look for basically a new species. As a zoologist, you probably know something about this. I mean, if you want to get funding um, from a reputable body, then national grant or whatever, then you have to rationalize what you intend to do in relation to existing theory in zoology or primatology or what have you. I don't think it will work. Just say, oh well, there is this anthropologist who has reported all this information from local folk zoologists about these creatures and they might exist. So I want to go out there and look for one or look for some. That won't fly with grantors or of funds or grantors of permissions. There are certain moral problems as well, ethical problems, I should say, in going to a place like Flores and um, yeah, uncovering some. Well, let's just call it a new animal, an undiscovered species, particularly one that is hominin. The consequences for local people would likely be quite negative. You can imagine whole areas, forests and so on being shut down, local people being excluded, masses of foreign visitors coming to the island. I mean, no doubt some people would benefit from this kind of thing, but I think many wouldn't particularly.
It's interesting how it can go from such a like 0 to 100 situation where you can have almost no focus on it, but then if something appears, the focus then completely shifts and people try to capitalize on it. I also
Mhm.
think it's incredible as well with like the case of the gorilla. I know that in the Congo, I think it was in the 19th century maybe, that the native people there were saying to Westerners that were coming, saying like, "Oh, there's this big, you know, big ape-like man thing," and they were sort of saying to them, "No, don't be ridiculous. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous." And then the gorilla, is subsequently discovered.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah, the gorilla, both species of gorilla were not discovered until well after, um, well into, I guess I should say, the 19th century, and after Cuvier, his famous proclamation that all large animals that existed had already been discovered. And there's a whole list, of course, um, of species, including Komodo dragons, which is one of my current interests. I was recently on Flores, actually.
Oh, really?
Got
Okay.
back just a week ago, and mostly on a holiday, I will say. Um, and so still suffering from jet lag. But no, for the first time I visited Komodo Island and Rincha and other surrounding islands, and also parts of northern Flores I'd never been to before, despite their proximity to my field sites. And yeah, I mean that there are again, this is kind of related. That there are places where people give very good accounts of what sound exactly like Komodo dragons, particularly the varieties that are found in northwestern Flores, in locations quite a bit to the east, these haven't been recognized, haven't been documented uh, by um, by academic zoologists. So yeah, you've got you've got a parallel case there to a degree.
Uh, what if you could estimate maybe what would be the population size of this species? Would you have any estimate?
Which one, that Laiho?
Yeah, the Laihoa, yeah.
Yeah, um, it's a good question. I don't know. I think it'd probably be in the hundreds rather than the thousands. Um, but no, I mean, it depends on how many of these reports one finds credible, and people themselves say that they're rare. That's their own estimation. At the same time, that they are found in high mountain forests for the most part, and they may be talking about their intelligence. They may be particularly clever at keeping themselves hidden, as it were. Although, yeah, as I said, so they have been seen, according to what some people say.
Well, it also maybe was implied that they had, by the reports in your book, that they had a slight fear of humans, maybe more the dogs. I don't know.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah. No, no, they are fearful of humans, and humans are fearful of them. I mean, one thing I discovered, working through my information, writing the book, doing the analyses, was that yeah, humans are afraid of them as well, but more specifically, they seem to. Some of the sighting reports suggest they find them uncanny. That is to say, you know, um, like humans, but not enough to be human. So there's somewhere in between. There's a phenomenon that's been called the uncanny valley, I believe. I discussed that and it's first brought up in connection with robots, which can be not mistaken for humans, but that they can be so human-like that they give people the creeps, basically.
Yeah,
And something similar goes on with the Laihoa, which is remarkably which is about what one would expect. I would say, coming across a non-sapiens hominin, including something like a Homo erectus.
what do you think the best? I have to confess that I think I'm gonna go to Flores. I think I have I'm gonna try do a non-traditional funding way of investigating many things. I have a couple of different trips planned at the moment,
Uh-huh.
uh, zoologically related.
Yeah.
But after reading your book, you put the challenge. I think you put the challenge forward about young zoologists. So I'm gonna heed the call because I find it way too interesting to be ignored.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's good to hear.
so what in your opinion, what was the best route in terms of actually, I mean, I have a pretty decent camera. I think I don't know if I could capture something, but what would your advice be for looking for evidence of this creature?
Yeah. Um, Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I must confess, I'm not a field zoologist, so
Okay.
I'm an anthropologist. I work with people, and they're easy enough to find, but usually, so I can't really give an informed opinion. I mean, some people have talked about using drones,
Okay.
um, which. Yeah, sounds reasonable to me. Apparently, you don't need permission to deploy such things on Flores. Outsiders, non-Indonesians don't need permission. There is something called environmental DNA, which you would know more
Mm,
about than
yeah, yeah.
than I do. I
And what about
Yeah.
tracks? Has there any been reports of any like dwellings or footprints or anything like that?
Yeah, no reports of dwellings. Not a lot on footprints, which perhaps is a bit surprising. But my impression for a long time is that whereas people, Leo people, for example, Florinese villages, whereas at one time some of them were very good at tracking animals, game animals. A lot of that knowledge has been lost. So, how much attention people nowadays pay to tracks, I'm not certain. But yeah, I mean that would be something possibly to investigate further.
Yeah, because it seems, I mean, likely that they would have. The only thing is if that, although it's a seasonal areas, like is there monsoon season and then dry season in
Yeah,
Flores? So obviously if it's monsoon season, you're not going to have great footprints, but if it's dry season, you probably would have decent um footprints. But it's just I can't believe
yeah,
when I came to the end of your book and I thought this was going to be like like zoologists and people out there like fully investigating it because I can't believe that would be it's not being funded and researched.
yeah. Well, indeed. I don't know. I guess interest in this issue has kind of grown slowly. I mean,
Hmm.
I've been contacted by people before, including people who, proposed to go to Flores in search of these creatures, and nothing's come of it yet. But I mean, something could happen. Something could be discovered. to kind of break the ice a bit on this. For example, the two people I was talking to you about who reported seeing something back in 2019. I mean, they're still apparently keen, but they yeah, I'm keeping their identities hidden. They're confidential at their request, by the way. I mean, it's not clear that they will have the wherewithal to do anything further on this. I mean, they're both in full-time jobs with young families and all that kind of thing. So yeah, really, it really takes a professional, I would say, and then even then, this isn't the kind of research that you could conduct and conclude in just a month.
Hmm.
I would say if you're dealing with something very rare and elusive, it could it could take longer than a month.
What is what do you think is most likely? So do you think someone stumbling across it or something like that could be like what is the what's the reason for like a lack of a body maybe is it just because that they're small and in dense vegetation or
I would say that the main reason for the lack of body is so far is that anybody coming across such a thing, and this would be rare, would treat the body, the carcass, as something um, so to speak, supernaturally dangerous, and wouldn't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, they might take a picture, especially at present with a camera, but they would then have to keep the picture and report it, get the message through to authorities who would take it seriously and so on. But that hasn't happened yet. Um, I mean, some would argue, of course, that this means that there are no bodies, so that the thing doesn't exist. But I don't think it's quite that simple.
well just to finish up Gregor because I don't want to be like running it too long but what I find really fascinating and maybe you can just give me your thoughts on this is that in the book you mentioned stories as far back as the early 20th century and
Yeah. Mhm.
and for that to me that's to me that was like the major point is that you have a in 2003 you have a discovery of a skeleton that actually collaborates with the stories from before it was even known to be a species. I mean that is incredible to me.
Mhm.
It's just incredible evidence.
Yeah, I mean, the older stories, if nothing else, that they show that these images, to call them that, don't reflect familiarity with television or you know National Geographic films on chimpanzees or indeed in modern media productions about prehistoric humans.
Yeah, it's I'm blown away that it's not taken more seriously. It's just way too interesting. But anyway, that's the
Yeah.
state of
Well,
the state of affairs.
yeah, can I just ask you a question? I mean, you're a zoologist. Have you talked to colleagues about, have you raised
Well,
the question with them?
I think I've already got myself probably in trouble for talking about Bigfoot, so I think maybe I'm not taken too seriously. So
Yeah,
because my brain is not that I believe something is real, but I have at least the open mind and curious. I'm
yeah,
curious.
yeah.
Um, I think unfortunately there's a kind of closed-mindedness or I don't know what the correct term is, but a kind of over reliance on one side of our brain, like just like
Oh yeah,
everything has to be, like data driven and logic driven.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think you close off a whole other aspect. And maybe the data and the evidence doesn't come if you don't take the step to actually have some sort of faith or trust in that these people are telling stories that are actually real. So I don't know. Maybe I'm keen to do my own research because I just think it's, as you were saying, funding is kind of a nightmare unless you have a
Mhm.
particular goal in mind, unless you have maybe something that can be used at the end of it. It's very difficult to get funding, and I
Yeah,
don't know how you'd
yeah,
get funding for something like this. So
yeah,
I'm trying
yeah.
to move and doing conversations like this, hopefully growing an online platform, and then using that money to actually be able to investigate what I find fascinating, and this is one of those
Right,
stories.
right. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So it's because I think you need to have I'm sure there's many zoologists, but I also think maybe people get fearful and they think that because everyone else is acting a certain way that they kind of have to go along with it. So I think maybe if the more people speak and sort of express an interest in something, then more people sort of follow.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, I mean, certainly it's the case that pursuing this kind of topic can be dangerous for especially for young researchers such as yourself.
yeah, I don't care though. Thankfully, I'm fortunate enough that I've never had the need to sort of want to be part of an institution. So,
Oh, okay.
uh,
Well, no, I talk about people who are, especially people whose ambition is to become established
yeah, yeah, it's
academics.
very difficult. And I've talked to people who I interviewed a guy from America who's an established academic, and he researches Sasquatch North America, and his career is completely, it's not ruined, but it's not remotely what it maybe would be if he studied something different.
Okay,
Um,
is that Jeff Meldrum maybe?
yeah, Jeff Meldrum, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I know him. Yeah, yeah.
Um, I'm kind of moving away. I did my like a formal undergraduate in zoology, and then I just decided that it's too interesting. The world is too interesting to wait for the sort of formal process of academia. So I don't. I'd much prefer to be involved in field research and just do it myself.
Hmm.
Um, so this is. I'm really thank you so much for writing this book because it's actually, especially that last chapter. I felt like it was a real like call to action.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll finish. I'll just conclude. I'll stop recording and
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.